Welcome back. High mortgage rates and a lack of extra cash has forced many Kenyans to remain as tenants renting homes. But is this really a negative thing, or are there advantages to renting over buying? That's what we're discussing today, and to take us through the discussion is Mr. James Mugerwa. He is the Managing Director of Shelter Afrique. Welcome.
Thank you.
So start us off by saying, are there any advantages to renting over buying homes?
Definitely. Now you might be aware that at least 90% of Kenyans and Africans at large just can't afford to buy houses. So the fact that we need to look at these alternatives is something that is really true, and we should follow it up. The advantages that you see are quite a number, and these advantages are both for the private sector as well as the public sector. Rental actually has the opportunity of not requiring you to have huge down payments for the purchase of a house. So that is an immediate advantage that you can see. Not all of us would have the money that is required by banks for the down payment. Very often rentals are much lower than the mortgages that one would have to pay. So that also is an advantage for people who don't have a very high income. As we see the urbanizational trend, people will leave the rural areas. Initially, it's one person going out, and then the family follows. So it gives you the flexibility. As you move into the cities, you might start off with a small apartment, which is cheaper for you. And then as the family joins you, you can then look for bigger houses, which are more affordable once you have those families in place.
Okay. Are there any advantages in regards to security?
When you're going into an area where you're looking for a house to rent, you actually have the possibility of picking an area that is secure, especially if you're going into a complex where you have several people living in the same area. You inevitably have more people to share those houses with, so it creates that sense of security, which you might not necessarily have if you just picked a house in a remote area. So there are security advantages that we see in rentals.
Now, a majority of Kenyans are unable to afford mortgages to buy homes, and thereby this cuts short their dreams of home ownership. Would you say that renting a home is an acceptable alternative?
Oh, we all have that dream. We all are brought up looking at home ownership as the ultimate dream. We all really want to be owners of these houses. But we think that rental does not necessarily mean that you need to give up that dream. Rental could actually be a channel to ultimately owning the house. So if we put schemes in place that help to contribute to your ultimate owning of that house through the rent that you're paying, that's one way of getting to your dream of owning a house. What kind of schemes are those? We've seen in different countries schemes whereby the rent that you pay is actually a contribution, an ultimate contribution to buying the house. So if we had the infrastructure in place that would facilitate, that would ensure that that money is actually not being lost, that definitely could lead to owning a house. So it's a buy to own, it's a rent to own scheme that we've seen in different countries. So we think it's not necessarily a negative thing to rent a house. Actually, it might really be a viable option, and we need to have that cultural change so that it becomes more acceptable to rent a house rather than simply go out to buy a house at all costs. Is there a way for a tenant to seek legal redress against a landlord who raises rent frequently and, without notice? The legal system is in place. The problem, though, is most of the rents today are in the informal sector. So you have a lot of people who are simply not aware of their rights in terms of tenants. You have people who are simply scared of even going ahead and trying to raise a legal claim. So I believe, I'm not an expert on the Kenyan legal system, but I believe that the necessary protection is in place, but it does not necessarily mean that it is as effective as it should be. So the discussion that needs to be had is, do we really have the right contractual frameworks in place? Do we have the right protection for the tenants? And by the way, even the landlords need some protection. So it goes really beyond. I don't want us to really see it only from one side. If we want to create a viable rental sector, we really have to look at it from all angles. Otherwise, the landlords would not have any interest in renting out their houses. So we have to give them the right protection too. Other than a lack of knowledge, is there any other challenge that tenants face? Tenants today really struggle because, first of all, as I said, even the tenants themselves don't have enough accommodation to really rent. So there's a lack of supply, there's a lack of information. Unfortunately, even the infrastructure around housing is in most cases not available. We're talking about roads, we're talking about education, schools, we're talking about hospitals. All this leads to an acceptable renting environment. So unfortunately, as our economies grow, all this has to be taken into consideration. So it's not just really providing the houses themselves, but you really have to create everything around that.
Which factors must one look for when looking for the best house to rent?
Well, the choice for the place to live is very individual. So people have all kinds of things that they would think about before going into a certain area. But having done that, having decided more or less, having taken the individual consideration, the individual requirements into consideration, what we would advise is to look for infrastructure, transportation, water supply, education, the availability of schools, hospitals. But we also look at security, which is very key. And we would also try to ask them to look at the contractual framework they're going into. So would they be able to get out? And if they really do, what kind of notice they have to give? Do they have an option to stay longer? If the house is up for sale, do they have a preemptive right to buy that house? So I would advise people to look not only at the individual requirements or not only the infrastructure.
Much as renting may be the affordable option for now, the fact is that most decent rental homes with a proper infrastructure in place are still beyond the reach of the majority. So how can rent be made more affordable?
Most rental houses today are either high-end, out of reach, or are prevalently in the informal sector. So we really need to create a formal rental market. And by creating a formal rental market, what that means is that we then create an environment where private sector investment can flow in, because investors will only flow in if they have certainty. We need to create the right fiscal situations for these investors, the right tax breaks. So all these actually would then lead to a creation of a much bigger formal rental sector, which inevitably supply increases and then prices go down. So that's what we really actually are advocating for.
What is Shelter Afrique doing to encourage the placement of Kenyans in affordable rental housing?
It's our mission, of course. Our overall mission is to contribute to work with private and public institutions to the provision of affordable housing per se. Now, all the discussions that we've had so far have primarily focused around home ownership and buying of homes. So what we have done is to initiate debate, to initiate debate with all the key stakeholders involved in the value chain of rental houses. So we've begun discussions with the government, we've begun discussions with developers, we've begun discussions with pension funds who are potential private investors. We are discussing with consumer associations, with banks. So what we've done is, in practical terms, we've actually started that debate to really make people aware of the advantages of rental. So we've now organized a conference, the African Rental Housing Conference, which is going to take place in October from the 12th to the 16th. And we've invited all key stakeholders, the ones that I mentioned earlier on, as well as multilateral organizations, the World Bank, the IFC, to take part in this conference and start really increasing awareness in terms of also attracting funds in that sector.
Do you think that alternative building technology is going to contribute towards the rental market? Very
much so. Most of the housing material that is used today in most African countries is imported. So that inevitably means that the costs that are incurred in building houses for rent and for buying is high. So the more local content we can use, the lower the costs are bound to be. But it's not only about costs. Some of the local materials that we use are actually better. It's just that people are not aware of the fact that some of the material that we have readily available in our societies, in our countries, are just as efficient or even better. So we are convinced and we are certain that by using more and more local content, we will ultimately lead to lower building costs, which will then turn into lower rents.
You've heard it for yourself. Renting is a viable option. This recently renovated apartment is located along Mvuli Road in Westlands. Backup water is readily available from underground water tanks. Besides being surrounded by a secure perimeter wall with electric fencing, security is guaranteed by the 24-hour security surveillance. Ample parking space is provided for each unit. The monthly rent is 60,000 shillings. This master and suite apartment is located in a safe and secure neighborhood. Backup water is provided by the extra water storage tanks, and tight security is offered by the presence of security guards. The apartment is in close proximity to socio-economic amenities like shopping malls, schools and hospitals. The monthly rent is 40,000 shillings. This exceptional two-bedroom apartment boasts of spacious rooms with elegant finishing, fitted storage cabinets and inbuilt wardrobes. Located in Lower Kabete, the property is just 1 kilometer from the University of Nairobi School of Business and near Kabete Shopping Center next to Riverbird Resort. It's master and suite with a reliable supply of water and a separate laundry area. The apartment is in close proximity to social and economic amenities. The monthly rent is 32,000 shillings.